Rebecca Martinez had always been underestimated. Standing at 5'4" with gentle brown eyes and a soft voice, she didn't look like someone who could handle high-pressure situations. Her colleagues at Denver General Hospital often dismissed her contributions during staff meetings, and Dr. Harrison Mitchell, the chief of surgery, had a particularly nasty habit of referring to her as just a nurse whenever she offered medical insights. Rebecca had served as a combat medic in Afghanistan for 3 tours before transitioning to civilian nursing, but somehow her military experience seemed invisible to everyone around her. The morning of October 15th started like any other. Rebecca arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m., her usual time, and began preparing for the day shift. She checked on her patients, reviewed charts, and restocked medical supplies. The emergency department was unusually quiet, which should have been a relief, but Rebecca had learned to be suspicious of calm moments. In her experience, they usually preceded chaos. Dr. Mitchell swept into the nurses' station around 8 o'clock, his expensive suit immaculate and his attitude insufferable. He barely glanced at Rebecca as he grabbed a patient file from her hands. "I'll handle this case," he announced, as if she hadn't been the one managing the patient's care for the past 2 hours. "Why don't you go help with some bedpans or something more suited to your skill level?" Rebecca felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her professional composure. She had dealt with arrogant doctors before, and she knew that losing her temper would only reinforce their prejudices. Instead, she quietly continued her work, documenting patient vitals and administering medications with the precision that had kept soldiers alive in combat zones. The first sign of trouble came at 9:30 when the hospital's security system started blaring. Rebecca looked up from her computer terminal to see people running past the windows outside. Through the glass, she could see police cars arriving with their lights flashing. The emergency broadcast system crackled to life over the hospital's intercom, announcing that there was an active shooter situation in the downtown area and that all medical facilities should prepare for casualties. Rebecca's training kicked in immediately. While other staff members stood around looking confused and frightened, she began transforming the emergency department into a trauma center. She cleared beds, organized surgical supplies, and coordinated with the other nurses to establish triage protocols. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, each action designed to save precious seconds when lives hung in the balance. Dr. Mitchell appeared at her elbow, his earlier arrogance replaced by barely concealed panic. "What should we do?" he asked, his voice higher than usual. Rebecca almost smiled at the irony. The man who had dismissed her expertise 20 minutes ago was now looking to her for guidance in a crisis. She didn't waste time pointing out the contradiction. There would be time for that later. The first ambulance arrived within minutes, its sirens wailing as it pulled up to the emergency entrance. Rebecca grabbed her trauma kit and rushed outside to meet the paramedics. The victim was a police officer who had been shot in the shoulder while responding to reports of a sniper in the financial district. As Rebecca helped transfer him to a gurney, she noticed the familiar thousand-yard stare in his eyes, the same expression she had seen on countless soldiers' faces during her deployment. "Talk to me," she said, keeping her voice calm and steady as they wheeled him into the hospital. "What's your name?" "Officer Jake Thompson," he replied through gritted teeth. "There's a shooter on the roof of the Meridian building. He's got a clear view of the whole street. We can't get close enough to take him down." Rebecca's mind immediately began processing tactical information. The Meridian building was 12 stories tall with excellent sight lines in all directions. If the shooter had chosen that position, he knew what he was doing. She quickly triaged Officer Thompson's wound, painful but not life-threatening, and passed him off to another nurse before moving on to the next casualty. Over the next hour, a steady stream of wounded arrived at the hospital. Most were civilians who had been caught in the crossfire while trying to flee the area. Rebecca worked with mechanical efficiency, her hands steady as she cleaned wounds, started IVs, and coordinated with the surgical team. She had seen worse injuries in Afghanistan, but the familiar rhythm of combat medicine brought back memories she had tried to leave behind. Dr. Mitchell hovered nearby, ostensibly supervising but mostly getting in the way. He seemed overwhelmed by the volume of casualties and kept asking Rebecca for updates on patient conditions. She provided the information he requested while continuing to work, but she could see that he was struggling to keep up with the pace of emergency medicine. The situation outside continued to deteriorate. Through the emergency department windows, Rebecca could see SWAT teams taking positions behind vehicles and buildings. The sniper had effectively shut down 6 blocks of downtown Denver, and law enforcement seemed unable to find a way to neutralize the threat. Every few minutes, another shot would ring out, followed by radio chatter about another casualty. Rebecca was treating a woman with glass shards in her leg when she overheard 2 police officers discussing their tactical dilemma. "We can't get a clear shot," one of them was saying. "He's got cover from 3 directions, and the angle is all wrong for our snipers." "What about the building across the street?" the other officer suggested. "We checked. The only position that would work is the roof of the hospital, but we'd need someone who could make a shot from over 400 yards in urban conditions." Rebecca's hands never stopped moving as she processed this information. 400 yards was a challenging shot, but not impossible. She had made similar shots during her military service, though usually under very different circumstances. The question was whether she should get involved in what was clearly a law enforcement operation. The decision was made for her when the next wave of casualties arrived. Among them was a 7-year-old girl who had been shot in the abdomen while hiding in a coffee shop with her mother. Rebecca took one look at the child's pale face and knew that the situation had moved beyond professional considerations. This was about saving innocent lives, and she had skills that could make a difference. She quickly stabilized the girl and handed her off to Dr. Mitchell, who was finally proving useful in the operating room. Then she approached the senior police officer, who was coordinating the response from the hospital lobby. Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez looked exhausted and frustrated as she spoke into her radio, trying to coordinate multiple tactical units. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Rebecca said, her voice quiet but confident. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about the shooting angle. I might be able to help." Rodriguez looked up, taking in Rebecca's scrubs and hospital ID badge. "Are you security?" "No, I'm a nurse, but I'm also a former Army medic with sniper training. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and I'm familiar with urban tactical situations." Rodriguez's expression changed from skepticism to interest. "What's your experience with long-range shooting?" Rebecca kept her tone matter-of-fact. "I was designated marksman for my unit. My longest confirmed kill was at 630 yards under combat conditions. The shot you're describing is well within my capabilities." "This isn't a war zone," Rodriguez said, but Rebecca could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "There are legal complications, chain of command issues. That little girl I just treated won't care about legal complications if she bleeds out because we couldn't stop the shooter," Rebecca replied. "Every minute we delay, more people get hurt. I can end this." Rodriguez studied Rebecca's face for a long moment. In her eyes, she saw the same steady confidence that had kept Rebecca calm during the worst firefights in Afghanistan. There was no bravado, no false heroics, just a professional assessment of a tactical situation and a quiet determination to act. "What do you need?" Rodriguez asked finally. Rebecca was already mentally calculating angles and wind conditions. "Access to the hospital roof, a rifle with a scope, and 10 minutes to set up. I'll need someone to spot for me, preferably someone with military experience." Rodriguez nodded and spoke into her radio. Within minutes, she had arranged for a SWAT sniper rifle to be brought to the hospital and for Sergeant Mike Chen, a former Marine, to assist with spotting. Rebecca followed them to the elevator, her mind already focused on the task ahead. As they rode up to the roof, Rebecca felt the familiar pre-combat calm settling over her. This was what she had trained for, what she was good at. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The hospital roof provided an excellent vantage point overlooking the downtown area. Rebecca could see the Meridian building clearly, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. Using binoculars, she quickly located the sniper's position, a small maintenance structure on the building's roof that provided cover from most angles while still allowing a clear field of fire. Sergeant Chen set up the spotting scope, while Rebecca familiarized herself with the rifle. It was a Remington 700 with a high-powered scope, similar to the weapon she had used in Afghanistan. The balance felt familiar in her hands, and she quickly adjusted the scope for the distance and lighting conditions. Target is approximately 420 yards, Chen reported, his voice professional and calm. Wind is variable, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour from the southwest. He's using the maintenance shed for cover, but he has to expose himself to take shots. Rebecca settled into a prone position, the rifle's stock firm against her shoulder. Through the scope, she could see the edge of the maintenance shed where the sniper would have to appear to engage targets on the street below. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate and finding the zone of absolute focus that had served her well in combat. "I can see movement," Chen said quietly. "He's preparing to take another shot." Rebecca's finger rested lightly on the trigger as she waited for the target to present itself. This was the hardest part, the patience required to wait for the perfect moment. In Afghanistan, she had sometimes waited hours for a single shot, but here, every second meant potential casualties on the street below. The sniper emerged from cover, his rifle aimed at something Rebecca couldn't see. She had perhaps 2 seconds before he would fire and then disappear again. Her crosshairs settled on center mass, and she squeezed the trigger with the same smooth motion she had practiced thousands of times. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the scope, she saw the sniper stumble backward and fall. The threat was neutralized, but Rebecca remained in position, watching through the scope to ensure he didn't get back up. After 30 seconds with no movement, she finally lowered the rifle. "Target down," Chen reported into his radio. "Threat eliminated." Rebecca sat up, her hands steady as she engaged the rifle's safety. Around her, she could hear the sounds of the city slowly returning to normal, sirens winding down, radio chatter becoming less urgent, the distant sounds of people cautiously emerging from hiding. Lieutenant Rodriguez appeared at her elbow, her expression a mixture of relief and amazement. "Outstanding work, Rebecca. You probably saved dozens of lives today." Rebecca nodded, already thinking about the wounded people waiting downstairs. "I need to get back to my patients," she said, handing the rifle back to the SWAT officer who had brought it. The aftermath of the incident unfolded over the following days like a slow-motion avalanche. News of the nurse sniper spread through social media and traditional news outlets with remarkable speed. Rebecca found herself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, with reporters calling the hospital and showing up at her apartment seeking interviews. She declined all media requests, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. But the story had captured public imagination, and details about her military service and the circumstances of the shooting continued to emerge. The hospital's administration initially seemed unsure how to handle the situation, torn between pride in their employees' heroism and concern about potential liability issues. Dr. Mitchell's reaction was predictably self-serving. When reporters asked about Rebecca's role at the hospital, he was quick to emphasize her limited nursing duties and to position himself as the senior medical professional who had supervised the emergency response. He even suggested in one interview that Rebecca had acted recklessly by engaging in law enforcement activities while on duty. Rebecca watched his interview from the hospital break room, her jaw clenched with suppressed anger. She had saved lives, both through her medical work and her marksmanship, and he was trying to minimize her contributions to protect his own ego. It was the same pattern she had experienced throughout her civilian career, but now it was playing out on a public stage. The turning point came when Officer Thompson, the first casualty she had treated, gave his own interview to the local news. His account painted a very different picture of the events, emphasizing Rebecca's calm professionalism and her crucial role in organizing the emergency response. Other officers and medical personnel began speaking out as well, providing a more complete picture of her contributions. The hospital board of directors called an emergency meeting to address the situation. Rebecca was asked to attend, along with Dr. Mitchell and several other department heads. She sat quietly as the board members debated the proper response to the media attention, occasionally asking her direct questions about her actions. "Ms. Martinez," the board chairman said, "Dr. Mitchell has expressed concerns about your decision to leave your medical duties to engage in law enforcement activities. How do you respond to that?" Rebecca took a deep breath before answering. "With respect, sir, I never left my medical duties. I had stabilized all critical patients and ensured they were receiving appropriate care. The decision to engage the sniper was based on my assessment that stopping the threat was the best way to prevent additional casualties." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward in his chair. "But you're not qualified to make that kind of tactical decision. You're a nurse, not a police officer." Rebecca turned to face him directly. "I'm a nurse with more combat experience than most police officers will ever have. I've been in firefights where making the wrong decision meant people died. I made the right call." "You put the hospital at risk," Mitchell continued. "What if you had missed? What if there had been legal complications? What if I had done nothing and that little girl had died while we waited for someone else to solve the problem?" Rebecca's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. I've spent my entire career being told I'm just a nurse by people who wouldn't last 5 minutes in the situations I've handled. I'm tired of being underestimated. The room fell silent as Rebecca's words hung in the air. Board members exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the tension between their chief of surgery and the nurse who had become a public hero. Rebecca realized that this was her moment, the opportunity to finally address the systemic dismissal she had experienced throughout her civilian career. "I need to say something," she continued, her voice steady and professional. "For the past 3 years, I've been treated as second-class medical personnel by Dr. Mitchell and others. My military experience has been ignored, my medical insights dismissed, and my contributions minimized. Yesterday, when crisis hit, Dr. Mitchell asked me what to do because he knew I had the experience to handle it. But today, he's back to treating me like I'm incompetent." Dr. Mitchell's face reddened. "That's completely inappropriate. I've always treated you with professional respect." "No, you haven't," Rebecca replied calmly. "You've called me just a nurse in front of patients and colleagues. You've taken credit for my work and dismissed my recommendations. Yesterday, you panicked when the casualties started arriving, and I had to organize the entire emergency response while you stood around looking confused." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Rebecca could see that her words were hitting home, particularly with the board members who had observed the hospital's operations closely enough to recognize the truth in her statements. The board chairman cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Martinez. Do you have specific examples?" Rebecca had been preparing for this moment without realizing it. She pulled out her phone and began reading from notes she had kept over the past year. October 3rd, during the cardiac arrest in room 12, Dr. Mitchell told me to stay out of the way and let the real medical professionals handle it, even though I was the one who had identified the patient's deteriorating condition. September 15th, he dismissed my recommendation for additional blood work on Mrs. Patterson, calling it nurse paranoia, only to order the same tests 2 days later when her condition worsened. She continued listing incident after incident, each one a small humiliation that had contributed to a pattern of professional disrespect. The board members listened in growing discomfort as the scope of the problem became clear. Dr. Mitchell tried to interrupt several times, but Rebecca pressed on. "The point isn't just that I was treated poorly. The point is that this attitude affects patient care. When experienced medical professionals are dismissed because of their job titles, patients suffer. Yesterday proved that experience and competence matter more than hierarchy." When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Finally, the board chairman spoke. "Dr. Mitchell, how do you respond to these allegations?" Mitchell's composure had cracked during Rebecca's recitation. I, I may have been direct in my communications, but I've never intentionally undermined anyone's professional contributions. Ms. Martinez is obviously skilled, but she needs to understand the chain of command in a medical setting. The chain of command didn't stop you from asking for my help when you were overwhelmed, Rebecca replied. It seems like hierarchy only matters when it's convenient for you. The board meeting concluded with a promise to conduct a full investigation into the hospital's workplace culture and Dr. Mitchell's management style. Rebecca left the conference room feeling emotionally drained but oddly liberated. For the first time in her civilian career, she had spoken truth to power without backing down. The investigation that followed was thorough and damaging to Dr. Mitchell's reputation. Other nurses and medical staff came forward with their own stories of dismissive treatment and professional undermining. The pattern that emerged painted a picture of a department head who ruled through intimidation and ego rather than competence. Rebecca continued working her regular shifts while the investigation proceeded, but she noticed a subtle shift in how her colleagues treated her. The combination of her heroic actions and her willingness to confront the hospital's power structure had earned her a new level of respect. Doctors who had previously ignored her input began actively seeking her opinions, and younger nurses started approaching her for advice and mentorship. The media attention gradually died down, but not before Rebecca received job offers from several other hospitals and even a few private security firms. She was tempted by some of the opportunities, particularly a position with a veterans hospital that specifically sought her combination of medical and tactical experience. Dr. Mitchell, meanwhile, found himself increasingly isolated. The investigation had revealed enough problematic behavior to warrant disciplinary action, and several board members privately expressed doubts about his leadership abilities. He began treating Rebecca with exaggerated politeness, clearly uncomfortable with the power dynamic that had shifted so dramatically. 3 weeks after the sniper incident, Rebecca was called into another board meeting. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different. The board chairman smiled as she entered the room, and several members stood to greet her personally. Ms. Martinez, the chairman began, we've completed our investigation and we owe you an apology. The treatment you described was unacceptable, and we're taking steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. Rebecca nodded, waiting to hear what those steps would be. We're also pleased to offer you a new position, the chairman continued. We'd like to create a director of emergency preparedness role, with responsibilities for training staff in crisis response and coordinating with law enforcement and emergency services. It would be a significant promotion with a substantial salary increase. Rebecca had been expecting some kind of acknowledgement, but the scope of the offer surprised her. What about Dr. Mitchell? Dr. Mitchell will be transitioning to a new role focused on surgical procedures rather than department management, the chairman said diplomatically. We feel it's better suited to his strengths. Rebecca almost smiled at the careful phrasing. It was clear that Mitchell was being demoted, though the board was trying to frame it as a lateral move. She appreciated their attempt to handle the situation with some dignity, even if Mitchell hadn't shown the same consideration to others. The new position came with an office, a staff, and the authority to implement real changes in the hospital's emergency preparedness protocols. Rebecca threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had brought to her nursing duties, but now she had the resources and authority to make systematic improvements. She developed training programs that drew on her military experience, teaching medical staff to function effectively under pressure and to coordinate with law enforcement during crisis situations. She established relationships with local police and emergency services, creating communication protocols that would prevent the confusion that had marked the early response to the sniper incident. Dr. Mitchell, meanwhile, struggled with his reduced role. Without the authority to intimidate subordinates, he found himself evaluated solely on his medical competence. His surgical skills were adequate, but his interpersonal abilities remained problematic. Several nurses reported that he seemed bitter about his demotion and occasionally made snide comments about Rebecca's promotion. Rebecca chose to ignore these reports, focusing instead on building her new department. She hired 2 additional staff members, both veterans with emergency response experience, and began developing specialized training programs for different types of crisis situations. The work was rewarding in ways that regular nursing had never been. Rebecca found herself using all aspects of her experience, medical, tactical, and leadership, to create something genuinely valuable. She was no longer just responding to crises. She was actively working to prevent them and to minimize their impact when they occurred. 6 months after the sniper incident, Rebecca received a call from a reporter working on a follow-up story. The journalist was interested in how the hospital had changed since the incident and wanted to interview both Rebecca and Dr. Mitchell. Rebecca agreed to the interview, but only on the condition that the focus would be on the hospital's improved emergency preparedness rather than personal conflicts. She had no interest in continuing to relitigate her problems with Mitchell, especially since those problems had been largely resolved. The interview took place in Rebecca's new office, which was filled with emergency response manuals, tactical communications equipment, and photos from training exercises. Rebecca explained the changes that had been implemented and the improvements in the hospital's ability to respond to various types of emergencies. When the reporter asked about her relationship with Dr. Mitchell, Rebecca kept her response professional. Dr. Mitchell is a skilled surgeon, and we work together effectively in our respective roles. The hospital is better served when everyone focuses on their areas of expertise. The reporter pressed for more details about the conflicts that had been reported, but Rebecca refused to elaborate. She had made her point, proven her competence, and moved on to more important work. The follow-up article, when it appeared, painted a picture of a hospital that had learned from crisis and emerged stronger. Rebecca's quotes emphasized the importance of preparation and the value of diverse experience in emergency response. The article barely mentioned Dr. Mitchell, focusing instead on the systematic improvements that had been implemented. Dr. Mitchell, however, was not content to let the matter rest. He began making comments to other staff members about Rebecca's self-promotion and her unearned position. He suggested that her military background was irrelevant to hospital administration and that she had manipulated the situation to advance her career. These comments eventually reached Rebecca through the hospital's informal communication network. She realized that Mitchell was trying to undermine her credibility and damage her reputation, possibly hoping to reverse the changes that had cost him his authority. Rebecca's first instinct was to confront him directly, but she had learned the value of patience and strategic thinking. Instead, she began documenting Mitchell's behavior, just as she had documented his previous pattern of dismissive treatment. She also began paying closer attention to his professional performance, looking for evidence of the competence problems that his behavior suggested. She didn't have to wait long. During a multi-casualty incident involving a bus accident, Rebecca observed Mitchell's response from her position in the emergency command center. His performance was adequate but uninspired, and she noted several instances where he seemed overwhelmed by the pace of emergency medicine. More importantly, she observed him making the same dismissive comments to younger staff members that he had previously directed at her. His behavior hadn't changed. He had simply shifted his targets to people with less power to fight back. Rebecca began quietly documenting these incidents, building a new case against Mitchell's professional conduct. But this time, she approached the situation with the authority of her new position and the credibility she had earned through her crisis response work. She also began networking with other department heads and senior staff members, building alliances that would support her if another confrontation became necessary. The hospital's culture had shifted since the sniper incident, and Rebecca found that many people were willing to speak honestly about problems that had previously been ignored. The opportunity for action came when Mitchell made a serious error during a routine surgical procedure. The mistake wasn't life-threatening, but it required additional surgery to correct and extended the patient's recovery time. Rebecca wasn't directly involved in the case, but she heard about it through the hospital's quality improvement process. When she reviewed the incident report, she noticed that Mitchell had blamed the error on distractions and inadequate support from nursing staff. Rebecca recognized the same pattern of deflecting responsibility that had characterized his earlier behavior. Rebecca decided it was time to act. She scheduled a meeting with the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Sandra Williams, who had supported her during the previous investigation. Rebecca presented her documentation of Mitchell's continuing behavior problems, including his recent surgical error and his attempts to blame others for his mistakes. Dr. Williams listened carefully to Rebecca's presentation, occasionally asking questions about specific incidents. When Rebecca finished, Williams sat back in her chair and sighed. "I had hoped that the previous disciplinary action would resolve these issues," Williams said. "But it appears that Dr. Mitchell hasn't learned from the experience. His behavior is affecting staff morale and potentially compromising patient care," Rebecca replied. "The surgical error is particularly concerning because it suggests that his problems go beyond interpersonal issues." Dr. Williams nodded. "What are you recommending?" Rebecca had given this question considerable thought. "I think Dr. Mitchell needs more intensive supervision and possibly additional training in both surgical techniques and professional conduct. If he can't or won't change his behavior, then the hospital needs to consider whether he's suitable for his current position." "That's a serious recommendation," Williams said. "Are you prepared to support it with formal documentation?" Rebecca handed over a thick folder containing incident reports, witness statements, and her own detailed observations. "I've been preparing for this conversation for months. The evidence speaks for itself." Dr. Williams spent the next hour reviewing the documentation, occasionally asking Rebecca to clarify specific points. When she finished, her expression was grim. "This is more extensive than I realized," she said. "Dr. Mitchell is clearly struggling with the changes in his role, but his response is unacceptable. I'll need to discuss this with the board." Rebecca left the meeting feeling both relieved and apprehensive. She had taken a significant risk by formally challenging Mitchell again, but she believed it was necessary to protect the hospital's staff and patients. The board's response was swift and decisive. Within a week, Dr. Mitchell was called into a meeting where he was presented with the evidence of his continued problematic behavior. The board made it clear that his position was in jeopardy and that immediate improvement was required. Mitchell's reaction was predictably defensive. He accused Rebecca of orchestrating a campaign against him and suggested that she was abusing her new authority to settle personal scores. But the evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss, and the board had lost patience with his excuses. The final straw came when Mitchell made a public scene in the hospital cafeteria, loudly complaining about Rebecca's vendetta against him. Several patients and visitors witnessed the outburst, and the hospital's administration decided that his behavior had become a liability. Dr. Mitchell's termination was announced quietly, with the hospital's public statement citing restructuring and new strategic directions. Rebecca learned about it through an email from Dr. Williams, who thanked her for her professional courage in addressing the situation. Rebecca felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness at the news. She had never wanted to destroy Mitchell's career, but she had refused to accept his continued abuse of authority. The hospital was better off without him, and the staff members who had suffered under his leadership deserved better treatment. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca noticed a significant improvement in the hospital's workplace culture. Without Mitchell's intimidating presence, staff members were more willing to speak up about problems and to collaborate on solutions. The emergency department, in particular, functioned more smoothly with better communication between doctors and nurses. Rebecca's own reputation continued to grow, both within the hospital and in the broader medical community. She was invited to speak at conferences about emergency preparedness and crisis response, and she began consulting with other hospitals on their own preparedness programs. The sniper incident had become a case study in tactical medicine and interagency cooperation. Rebecca found herself cited in academic papers and training manuals as an example of how diverse experience could be valuable in unexpected situations. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the patients and families who had been affected by the incident. Rebecca received letters from people thanking her for her role in saving lives, and she was invited to several community events honoring first responders and medical personnel. One letter particularly touched her. It was from the mother of the 7-year-old girl who had been wounded in the shooting. The child had made a full recovery, and her mother wanted Rebecca to know how grateful she was for both the medical care and the decisive action that had ended the threat. "You didn't just save my daughter's life," the letter read. "You saved all of our lives by having the courage to act when others hesitated. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Rebecca kept the letter in her desk drawer, pulling it out whenever she needed a reminder of why her work mattered. The hospital politics and professional conflicts seemed less important when she remembered that real people's lives hung in the balance. A year after the sniper incident, Rebecca was offered a position as Director of Emergency Preparedness for the entire hospital system. a role that would involve coordinating crisis response across multiple facilities. It was a significant promotion and a recognition of her expertise in the field. She accepted the position, knowing that it would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But she also knew that she had found her calling in the intersection of medical care and emergency response. As Rebecca settled into her new role, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a dismissed nurse to a respected leader in emergency preparedness. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it had required her to confront powerful people who were comfortable with the status quo. But she had learned that competence and courage could overcome prejudice and hierarchy. Her military experience, which had been ignored and dismissed for years, had ultimately proven to be her greatest asset in civilian life. The sniper incident had been a turning point, but it wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter in which she could use all of her skills and experience to make a real difference in people's lives. She still remembered the day Dr. Mitchell had called her just a nurse for the last time. She had been treating a patient with a complex medical condition, and her recommendations had been crucial to the patient's recovery. When Mitchell dismissed her input, she had looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not just a nurse. I'm a combat veteran, a skilled medical professional, and someone who doesn't back down from important fights." Mitchell had walked away without responding, but Rebecca knew that her words had carried weight. She was no longer the quiet, accommodating nurse who accepted disrespect in the name of professional courtesy. She was a leader who demanded the respect she had earned through her competence and courage. The hospital system was better for the changes she had implemented, and the staff members who worked under her leadership knew that their contributions were valued regardless of their job titles. Rebecca had created the kind of workplace culture she had wished for during her own early career. Looking back, she realized that the sniper incident had been both a crisis and an opportunity. It had forced her to use skills she had hoped never to need again, but it had also given her a platform to demonstrate her true capabilities. She had taken down more than just an enemy sniper that day. She had also taken down the assumptions and prejudices that had limited her potential for years. The little girl who had been wounded in the shooting had recovered completely, and Rebecca had helped create a safer, more professional environment for everyone who worked at the hospital. In the end, she had proven that being just a nurse was actually being something extraordinary, a skilled professional who could adapt to any situation and rise to any challenge. The people who had underestimated her had learned to see her differently, and those who came after her would benefit from the changes she had fought to implement. Rebecca Martinez had finally found her place in the world, and she intended to make the most of it.